Welcome all to the second part of a two-part presentation regarding the stained glass windows of Congregation Beth Israel's main sanctuary. Part one, for those of you that were not there, dealt with the architectural history of the sanctuary and to a degree the history of the congregation through its buildings in Portland, and a look at the architectural styles, influences, context of architecture, and our Byzantine chapel. But this part two will look at the stained glass, and particularly the themes, the main themes going through Genesis 1 to 31, but also look at the broader context of themes and images of who we are, who the Jewish community is, and what we look at as those kind of cues. So to begin, I'm going to have a lot of slides with text, but I'll ask that you focus on the images, and I'll read the texts. And someday I'll get a professional reader to do that. For Jews, then, the places we call sacred tell the tale of who we are, where we have come from, and where we believe we are going. The arts conspire to give the unified picture of the universe favored by the building design. And this is from a book on the public prayer, the art of public prayer. And this image is from a poster that was developed for the 150th anniversary of the congregation, and reflecting the nature of celebration in the space for multiple generations. And this in part is a key aspect of the sanctuary or a sacred space. The most successful places of worship have at least one thing in common: architecture that transforms earthly materials into compositions so powerful they evoke something beyond our world. That's really a key expression, and we will revisit that concept as we go through the images. Congregation Beth Israel, the main sanctuary, is considered a sacred space, and by multiple citations. One, it is listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1972. TBI is listed by Sacred Spaces International as one of 10 such spaces in Portland. TBI is listed as one of 10 sacred places in America by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And finally, TBI was featured in the Public Broadcasting Service documentarian God in America, a co-production of American Experience and Frontline. I've broken up the presentation into 5 segments, so we have a point of reference as we go through this. And so we'll look at the inspiration and design to begin with. In Genesis 28:16 to 17, a familiar passage to many of us. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." He was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." And what this image is typically referring to, or has been interpreted, and we have a stained glass at Temple Beth that interprets this image, is really the ladder or stairs as that gateway with angels coming up and down. But I use this image because in so much of liturgy, it is light that serves as the source of Adonai, or the image of Adonai. Congregation Beth Israel Sanctuary, inspiration and design. The architect, the principal architect, design architect for Temple Beth was Herman Brookman, who was often referred to as a stormy petrel, which is a bird that is a harbinger of trouble for men out to sea, because usually the bird would hide around the ship during stormy times, and that's how the sailors knew a storm was coming. He was never formally educated in architecture, but was from the old school of apprenticeship in architecture, and worked for one of the more prominent architects in New York, Harry T. Lindbergh. When he was commissioned to do the main sanctuary, Temple Beth, because he was relatively new in town, brought out by a congregant from the Lloyd estate, or I want to say Frank Lloyd Wright, but that's not it. It's the Lloyd estate out at what is now Lewis and Clark College. But because he was a one-man operation, he needed a bigger production shop to work on, and that production capability was brought to the office of Morris Whitehouse. Harry Albert Herzog was a member of the congregation and served as the congregation's supervising architect and liaison to the architect. And Herzog brought on John V. Bennis, who was a colleague and had done a lot of commercial buildings. A lot of his work is down at the OSU campus. So it was really a collaborative effort of those four, Brookman, Whitehouse, Herzog, and Bennis. The basic nature of the architecture of the sanctuary is that of the Byzantine. On your right, you can see a basic early floor plan, which is not too dissimilar from Congregation Beth Israel, particularly if you look at the asp as the entrance, main entrance, and those top and bottom sacristy as our stairways up into the gallery area. But the basic form of a Byzantine is reflected on the left. And the most famous of those Byzantine pieces of architecture is Hajif Sophia in what is now Istanbul, formerly Byzantium. The basic architectural form, it is believed, was based on Steelstrasse Synagogue in Essen, Germany, designed in 1914. And so it was at the time considered a first modern temple in Germany. And the interior was destroyed on Kristallnacht, November 10th, 1938. It is now a Jewish museum. This sanctuary or synagogue was in place at a time when Brookman was touring Europe. So in 1920, 21. So there's a good chance he came across this building. That's an assumption. When he was brought on board to design the temple, some of his studies of architecture in Europe were influenced by Lombardy architecture. And the temple that you see here in St. Francisco facade around 700-800 CE was the principal influence for the Brookman design of our sanctuary. You can see the similarities between his early sketch and the historic image of the Lombardy architecture. The interior sketches, at least at the time during design development, had a clear story of windows below the dome. And so while those were never constructed, the idea for stained glass was early on, as was the oculus up in the dome ceiling. The view here is towards the gallery or the balcony area. And so while the image he was playing with at that time looked like it could have been tablets, Ten Commandment tablets, we know that it ended up being the menorah. None of the interior sketches that I've been able to find indicate there were any real designs for the stained glass windows at that time. And in fact, the stained glass windows were just conceptualized that there would be stained glass windows. But the building was completed in 1928, and it was nearly 20 years before the first designs for the stained glass window had appeared. I think the last stained glass windows that we're going to look at today were completed around early 50s, 1954, 1955. And so it's basically a 20-year fundraising campaign to get the stained glass windows. So between the time the building was completed in 1928 till about the late 40s, early 50s, the outside of the sanctuary had these rose-colored glass pieces what was the only thing there. And it was later that the stained glass was placed behind those in the sanctuary. This is the final floor plan that was completed. Let me do something here real quickly. Okay. I see. Somebody wants to be admitted here, so I'll just do that. There we go. For some reason, I can't move it forward. There we go. And this was the completed rendering just at the time of the first use of the sanctuary. The original design intent was that the main entrance would be off of Gleason, but that ended up being on Flanders. But we still have that long stairway going up from Gleason. At the dedication ceremony in April 28th of 1928, in attendance were the incoming rabbi, Rabbi Berkowitz, there on your left. In the center there with the glasses is Rabbi Jonah B. Weiss, who was the principal rabbi during the design and construction of the sanctuary. He ended up leaving for a new pulpit in New York. And it is understood that Rabbi Berkowitz really took a lead on the concept behind the stained glass, the narrative behind the stained glass. And getting back to that point I made earlier about the nature of taking raw materials and creating a transcendent space that takes you beyond the physical, Rabbi Berkowitz's comment at the time when he first experienced it is that it is exquisite in beauty as a polished gem, will only enhance its ability to inspire all men who seek spiritual help within its walls. It is like a lyric poem in brick and stone, and I've never seen anything like it in either this country or Europe. The art of the craft. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "See, I have singled out by name Bezalel, son of Ur, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. I have endowed him with a divine spirit of skill, ability, and knowledge in every kind of craft, to make designs for work in gold, silver, and copper, to cut stone for setting, and to carve wood, to work in every kind of craft." And Bezalel was responsible for making the Ark of the Covenant and pretty much everything else in the first tent of meetings. The designer for the stained glass itself was Albert Gerlach. He was chosen from a competition of submittals of stained glass artists and artisans. Even Tiffany and Company was rejected. So Gerlach, he was a stained glass artisan and studied at the Chicago Art Institutes. And to quote him, the importance of stained glass in its relationship to architecture is not sufficiently appreciated by most people. In a church or cathedral, the colored windows absolutely dominate the decorative scheme of the interior. Without its glass, the interior of Chartres would be dignified and noble, but its power to enhance would be gone. And the image below is actually not Chartres. It is Saint Chapelle in France. I figured that sanctuary actually reflected the quote more than the one that Gerlach was referring to. Gerlach also worked with another artist, a stained glass artist, and she worked on many projects with Gerlach, including Congregation Beth Israel. Gorman attended Pratt Institute in New York in 1910, and she was influenced by the realism in the Ashcan School of Painting. Many of her closest male professional associates were Portland architects who provided her support system. She was in the circle of Warren Weber, Harold Doughty, and Morris Whitehouse, among others. So she was familiar with one of the architects at that time who helped on the building originally. During her lifetime, she was the only woman to be selected an honorary member of the American Institute of Architects. And below are some of the projects that she had worked on. She was really into inlay woodwork as well, and you can still see some of her work here in the community. Themes are the eternal truths that lie behind the stories, images, and metaphors that religions never tire of telling. They are beyond empirical demonstrations. They are what the religion is all about. Stained glass, historic context, inspiration, and themes. Historically, we can look at ancient old synagogues and their directive or decorative motifs, because the stained glass was both a highly skilled art and the cost of glass was very expensive. Early decorative motifs were often either Hebrew text reflecting the the time period or what the congregation felt was key messages in prayer or qualities of Adonai. And in particular, when I was touring Prague and in Poland, in Krakow, you saw a lot of some of the oldest sanctuaries that had no decoration but for text. And some have commented earlier that also reflected the phrase Shema, hear or listen, versus looking. And the decorative motifs got more complex and intricate, but still reflected various themes of Judaism. Other than the story of Genesis, there are other themes that are very, very common and that we'll see as we look at the stained glass. If we look at a typical cutout here of the tabernacle within the tent of meetings or the court of the tabernacle, there are basically 6 elements. that show up. The altar of burnt offerings, the bronze laver where hands would be washed. Once you step inside the holy place, there would be the table of showbread, the menorah, altar of incense, and of course, the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies. Other themes that are picked up, as reflected on the left, is the tablets being given to Moses on Sinai, a menorah, the Star of David, and the Tree of Life. But the major themes that we are going to look at, as I indicated earlier, and the title suggests, it's really the story of Genesis. But within that, a key component is of those themes are both the patriarchs and the tribes. So as Jacob called unto his sons and said, "Gather yourselves together that I may tell you that which will befall you in the end of days," the blessing of Jacob is a prophetic poem that appears in Genesis at 49, 1 to 27, and mentions each of Jacob's 12 sons. Genesis presents the poem as the words of Jacob to his sons when Jacob is about to die. Unlike Moses, Jacob is not afraid to castigate some of the tribe, in particular Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. The reference there to unlike Moses was when Moses gave his blessing to the tribes at the end of Deuteronomy. So there's sort of a, if you will, full circle, the blessings of Jacob, and then in Deuteronomy, the blessings of Moses to the tribes, because Moses obviously at that point knew he was not going into the promised land. The idea of the tribes is reflected in a lot of different art, and it's also reflected in the breastplate. Aaron's breastplate, typically referenced as different jewels, but also the color of jewels with the various interpretations or banners or badges of the different tribes. So in the course of time, artistic traditions develop conventionalized ways of expressing religious themes. Jewish conventions often appear informally. Moses with a patriarchal beard and a staff. Conventions operate officially and unofficially, and they come and go. What makes them conventions is that they extend through at least several generations. So as we look at the sons of Jacob, and included Manasseh and Ephraim, they were sons of, Joseph, not Joseph, I'm sorry. Joseph, I'm sorry. And each had his own character defining quality, which we then look at reflected in different images. If we look some of the more modern interpretations, particularly that of Marc Chagall, the idea of the 12 tribes is reflected up above on the left in more of an abstract form. The stained glass on the upper right has those themes of the tree of life, the burning bush, and the menorah. And down below, other abstractions of similar themes in the stained glass window at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. So you can take a theme and manipulate it and interpret it many, many different ways. And that is the point that is being made. The themes are somewhat consistent and varied, but they're in representation can vary through time and different media. In our sanctuary, the 6 tripart windows follow a theme through Genesis. And as you walk into the sanctuary and you look to your right, that is the first set of windows, and you work your way around counterclockwise to the last set of windows. The stained glass that was in the sanctuary at the time of construction was the menorah on the west elevation that you see from the west facade, the menorah over the bema, and the Star of David up in the oculus in the dome, the top of the dome, and a few other minor locations. The original staff entrance with the priestly blessing that we saw at the beginning, and just some pretty straightforward stained glass over the main entrance. So the first set of windows is the first day of creation. Themes are the Sabbath, Abraham and the tribe of Reuben and Simeon. The second window group is the second day of creation, Rosh Hashanah, Jacob and the tribes of Levi and Judah. Third group is third day of creation, Yom Kippur, Joseph and the tribes of Issachar and Zebulun. The fourth window group on the left side of the bema is the fourth day of creation, Passover, Moses and the tribes of Benjamin and Dan. Fifth group is the fifth day of creation, Shavuot, Solomon and the tribes of Naphtali and Gad. And finally, the sixth day of creation, Sukkot, David and the tribes of Asher, Manasseh, Ephraim, and particularly, and God saw all that he had made and found it very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. So we're going to look at each grouping of windows in detail so you can see how that is interpreted and the evolution of interpretation as well. Given that while Rabbi Berkowitz led the thematic aspect of it, there were several congregants involved, and so there was always 5 people and 7 opinions. An illustrated walk through Torah and the days of creation in stained glass. The basic concept of the layout of windows is that there are 18 festival symbols and sub-themes at the very top of each tripart grouping. Below that are 18 rituals and days of creation, themes and symbols. Then below that is 18 holidays, rituals and symbols. And then the lower group, which is usually more generalized and graphic. Sometimes there'll be special dedications or other thematic aspects that came along through time. The lower tripart grouping is really where we get into the patriarchs and the tribes, and then 18 stained glass donor recognitions at the bottom, part of that 20-year fundraising campaign. So when we look at the first grouping of windows, you can begin to see some of those thematic aspects show themselves in the stained glass, and I'll just point those out if I can get my pointer to work. Let's see here. So, oops, sorry, keep hitting the wrong button. There we go. So here you can see a menorah lamp, first day of being. We have Shabbat candles and a cup, Kiddush cup. Below that is the tent of meetings and the ark. In the holy space, we have the showbread, basically challah made in a certain form. Then we have the actual challah on a table, and then just a general, general themes through time, and these vary. On the left here, you can see the drawings that were developed as a guide for discussion of what the direction that the artist was going based on the themes that came up by Rabbi Berkowitz and others. Again, the lower panels, we look at the patriarchs, and starting on with Simeon and Levi, our brothers, weapons of violence, their kinship caused, cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And that is based on what happened after the rape of Dinah. Pretty brutal stuff. The fortress refers to he was taken by Joseph, a hostage and imprisoned. That's after the brothers came out to Egypt and didn't recognize Joseph, and he held one of them hostage as they returned to get their father. Abraham, the center one, which is also used on the opening screen, Abraham, the wanderer's tent and staff, the stars recalling God, telling Abraham, so shall be your seed. Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the first fruits of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power, unstable as water. So we see that sort of roiling water there below. Oh, wrong way. There we go. More details of what we covered earlier, the tent of meetings in the Ark of the Covenant with two angels or cherubim, the table with showbread, as it was called in Jerusalem in ancient times, the Shabbat table with candles and challah. Originally, it was planned to be a bowl of fruit, but it became the challah instead. On the left, we have the Shabbat candles and Kiddush cup. Let there be light, the first day. And then the Shabbat lamp. It's actually supposed to be more three-dimensional, but it's a two-dimensional construct. The next series has to do with the creation, water below and above the heavens, rain, planets, and constellations. Aaron's breastplate, here's the Gerlach's rendering of what that would look like. The 12 jewels for priesthood of the Levites. Unfortunately, part of my screen is blocked by some text I can't get rid of on the Zoom, so I'll just sort of do my best. Start with Simeon and Levi, our brethren, weapons of violence, their kinship, cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob. And here we have the Jacob's ladder, the interpretation of Jacob's ladder. Kind of looks like stairs, but referred to as Jacob's ladder. Other images in detail of the Ark of the Covenant with the two cherubim, the menorah, the Torah, dealing with law and judgment. Then we have on the left above the stars and the planets. Interesting that Jupiter is so visible in that regard. The next below are trumpets. Trumpets proclaim. Water, water, the heavens. On the center one, the shofar on the bottom and above the incense. On the left are clasped hands, a friendship window that was gifted by members of the Christian community. Malachi, have we all one Father, hath not one God created us? And it was presented, I think, before the 1950s, after World War II. And then the third tripart set is grass and fruit of creation. Here on the left is a new name added to the window. The Tonkin family had donated in name of their father to restore that window. And so his name was added. Zebulon, again, some of my text is not visible. Heaven of the sea, he shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall adjoin Sidon. The tribe of Zebulun seems to have settled the piece of land setting between the Mediterranean Sea and the Sea of Galilee. Joseph and the 7 ears of corn, a fruitful burrow by a well, his branches run over the wall. The archers have bitterly grieved him. The archers, shot at him and hated him. The wheat has to do with his dream about prosperity and famine. And so they chose to focus on the prosperity of the wheat and the corn. Issachar is a strong donkey lying down between 2 burdens. He saw the rest was good and that the land was pleasant. He bestowed his shoulder to bear a burden, and he became a band of slaves. Again, the symbol from the tent of meetings, the brazen laver for washing hands, and up above was a ram caught in the thicket, referring to Abraham sacrificing the ram instead of Isaac. The next center one is the altar of burnt offerings. That would be the first thing that the Israelites would see as they enter the tent of meetings. And then we have the brazen laver again for washing the hands before you go into the holy tabernacle, and up above incense again, burner. Other themes, 2 great lights, which are basically the sun and the moon, images of the 10 Commandments given to Moses at Mount Sinai. On the left, we have the window for Dan. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Jan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels, so that its rider shall fall backward. I have waited for your salvation, O Lord. So if you look at the sketch, reflects the idea of Dan shall be a serpent by the way. But the conversation led to it actually, the stained glass being one that reflected that of judgment, which is a reoccurring theme in our story. In the center, we have Moses led the exodus of the Israelites out of Egypt and across the Red Sea, after which they based themselves at Mount Sinai, where Moses received the 10 Commandments. So there's the image up there, the triangle of Adonai shedding light onto the mountaintop. And then the last one here is on the right is Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. This was the tribe with the reputation for fierceness, and it's you get that wolf image of the wolf. We also see that image of the wolf up in some of the medallions, bas-reliefs up in the above the bima. I'll point that out a little bit later. In this group, we have I put asterisk harp, that Marion played, but it also has another name which eludes me at the moment. And then above is the doves of peace. In the center we had, and God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. Basically the sun, as I mentioned, the sun and the moon. On the far side, the left, we have the Paschal Lamb for slaughter, and above is from the Exodus, doorposts of your house. We'll look at that a little more closely. Exodus 12:7. They are to take some of the blood and put it on the two side posts and top of the door frames of the house in which they eat the lambs. I'm sorry for the blurriness of the rendering on the left, but it reflects the fish of the sea and the birds of the air during creation. Eagles, fowl, living creatures, creeping things, and pomegranates. And so we have the Gad, a troop tramped upon him, but he shall triumph at last. The tribe of Gad supplied many fine troops for the later king of Israel, David. And those tents reflecting those troops. Solomon, the eagle, he who gathers the words of the Torah, who understands them, who later enunciates them. Naphtali on the right. Naphtali is a deer let loose. He uses beautiful words. Naphtali is abounding with the favor of the Lord and is full of his blessing, and he will inherit southward to the lake, the Sea of Galilee. Other images in this next set is the shafts of wheat. Down below is the Torah in the ark. The center set is one that feared God and shunned evil. And on the right, it's have not been able to figure out what that basket of flowers is. So let me just turn this off. There. Still a work in progress. The next set deals with creation, living creatures, plants, cattle, wild beasts, creeping things, men and women. Etzat Chaim, Hebrew for tree of life, is a common term used in Judaism. The expression found in the book of Proverbs is figuratively applied to the Torah itself. Etz Chaim is also a common name for yeshivas and synagogues, as well as for the works of rabbinic literature. So here we have an ibex and the tree of life. Now we're at the last grouping of windows that looks at Manasseh and Ephraim. For all practical purposes, once Joseph's two sons reached maturity, married and had children of their own, they would be more named tribes of Joseph, not just Ephraim and Manasseh. And then when David became a young man, he began to work as King Saul's private musician. David's musical instrument was called the kinnor, which was usually translated as a lute or harp. As for Asher, his food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal dainties. Asher means happy, and certainly the blessing Jacob gave to Asher and his descendants was one of well-being, if not downright good fortune. That term Asher also, or happy, refers to Isaac, or when Sarah laughed when God said she would have a child. Here's the bowl of fruit that finally made it into the imagery. probably referring to the bounty of harvest time. The altar of incense, again, going back to the tabernacle, and the Sukkot hut related to the harvest, and probably that's why the bowl of fruit is included in that set of windows as well. So some of the design concepts and details as they evolved, going back to Ephraim, the bull, takes even further. It is not enough to just survive in an alien environment, but to thrive, to be fruitful in the hands of my affliction. Ephraim is the power to transform the difficulties into divine power. Menashe, the unicorn, represents the ability to not succumb to the powers of the Egyptian constraints that want to make you forget your spiritual roots. Menashe, to remain connected regardless of the challenges. Just parenthetically, the royal coat of arms of the United Kingdom, there's a lion and a unicorn standing on its hind. It's represented by England, east of the body of water we call the Atlantic Ocean. And Canada, west of the body of water, still lies north of Ephraim, the United States of America. So if you ever see the royal coat of arms for England, it has a relationship to Menashe and Ephraim. Looking at the sketch of the Aaron's breastplate, tribe of Levi, the initial sketch and what the window ended up becoming. The tree of life, again with the ibex, the sketch which served as the basis for cutting of the glass. The tribe of Asher, similar, it was all drawn to scale as a basis or template for cutting the glass. And in one of those lower panels that are varying themes, after World War II, this lower panel in the sixth tripart window was the American eagle, reflecting or dedicated to the Jewish servicemen who fought in World War II. Stained glass conservation and restoration, keeping the art and craft alive. So, like all pieces of art, they need help through time. The second tripart of windows was very unstable. And so we worked with the local stained glass artisan, David Schlicker, and his crew to come out, do an assessment, and then take the windows out for their restoration and rehabilitation. A great crew. So in the process, they also, when the stained glass windows were out, they put in some temporary plastic windows just to provide some diffusion of the light. And, you know, while up on the scaffolding, of course, it's a great opportunity to take a look at some of the other details and fine craft that we have in the sanctuary. And during the rehabilitation, I was lucky enough to be allowed into their studio space and get a real good close-up look at the windows. We call them stained glass, but they're really stained and painted. So it's a combination of color in the glass and paint that is then baked into the glass, which gives it more of a translucent quality. And this reflects some of the painting that was done, detail up close. Here's the studio where the work was done. It used to be located up around 42nd and Division. I think they've moved locations now. This is a piece of one of the tripart windows under restoration. You can see in the background other pieces of glass as well. So here you get a better sense on the left of how some of the quality of light was diffused and articulated with a dark paint. and the detail here of the stars and the moon and the planets. Thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of glass. A sketch to help them know what the end goal is to be. You can see some of the cut glass that they're working with right here, trying to refit it. This is the clasped hands image and a completely restored piece. And during the process of restoration, we asked them to salvage any piece that they removed. And so that was turned over to the congregation, and I created these images just to show you some of the details, some of the jewels, some of the painting. This was at one point one of the cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant that was damaged. You can see up here that was salvaged, and there was actually another crack in it that I reattached. And some of the other decorative motifs, some of the images we've already seen, and at some point we'll look at and get into detail. The wolf, ravenous wolf, the tablets given to Moses, the lions representing Judah, the brazen lavalier for washing hands. And that's all. So this image here of the blessing, priestly blessing, is on over the door to the original entrance to the sanctuary for staff. And so many of you may have seen that. It's still there, and it is in good shape. I want to thank the Teaching Tuesday team for hosting this. Team includes Rabbi Joseph, Sally, Rita, Rosie, Anita, and Chelsea for her support. So thank you very much. And I think maybe we'll go back and ask, we have a few minutes for any questions people may have. So Rita, can you take that back?
Trying to unmute.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Oh, Debbie has a question from Debbie.
Okay.
Henry, could you refresh my memory? When did all the work get done on refurbishing all the panels?
All the panels have not been refurbished. We have two of them that have been refurbished. I'm trying to open up my screen here, so bear with me.
Henry, if you click stop share, or I can stop share for you, and
Can
then
you stop share, please? Yes.
And then I'll have you start your video.
There we go.
Oh, here we go. Yeah, now I can see everybody.
Yay.
Except I just went.
Then Henry, can you start your video?
Yes, let me turn this off. For some reason, I'm not getting a lot of response. Okay, let me put my camera back on. All right.
There you go.
Any questions? There's only two window sets that have been restored. The set 2 facing due south, and set 3, which would be as you're looking at the bema, it would be on your right. That was done about 3 years ago.
Oh.
And as we look at projects in the sanctuary, we're continuing to look at where the greatest needs are. They're not cheap to restore, and some of the skill sets we had have moved on. So that will be a challenge to figure out what we do.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Any more questions? Oh, wait, here's a question. How long did it take this is from Joan Myers. How long did it take to do a panel?
Well, let me ask, ask you a little more detail. How long did it take to restore or originally build one?
I'm just reading. in my-
Originally, to do it, to create.
Well,
Oh.
I can't tell you per panel,
Good
but
question.
it was a 20-year effort that began to ramp up after World War II. And so one of the drawings that I come across by Gerlach had a date of 1947 on it. So I'm going to assume a year or so, maybe 46, that he was commissioned to begin the design process. The fundraising was still going on before the funds were actually there. Remember that 20-year period contained both the Depression and World War II.
Wow.
And so the other effort that was going on at that time was the desire of the congregation to build an educational building. And so they're raising funds both for the educational building, which is now the Sherman Education Center, that was completed, I think, in 48. So there was a concurrent process of both looking at the stained glass windows and designing and constructing the Temple Memorial House, which is what it was originally called. So between, let's say, roughly 47, 48 to the mid to late 50s, roughly a 10-year period to design and fabricate and install the windows.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next question. 2 questions from Phyllis and Warren. Is the text you read in each window, and also there are some areas that look abstract, is there any meaning to those?
If I understand your question correctly, the text that I shared comes from two basic sources. One source is, for those of you who have a copy of the temple history book that was published, I don't know, 15 years ago. If you ask Josh or maybe Chelsea, if you would like a copy, they're free to all members. That has a narrative about the windows. That narrative is also augmented considerably by Rabbi Rose and a congregant who knew Gerlach. And I'm sorry I don't have her name at the tips of my fingers, but she and Rabbi sat down and went into a considerable detail. And I have that complete narrative. It's a paper copy, an old hand crank type copy, so it's kind of fuzzy, but at some point I'd like to get it digitized or somebody do the word processing on it. So that would help augment the narrative. There's so much detail and meaning in each of them. I can only scratch the surface, but a lot of the references are specifically, as I read, to quotes in the Torah. Now the abstract part, again, by and large, the images are representational. They're not intended to be abstract, such as or an impressionistic, such as Chagall would do, but to be more explicit. And my own sense is, if there are abstractions, either that's something that you're seeing that is not really there, or they're just simply filler of graphic to create a border or other themes like triangles or menorah or Star of David. One of the, back in pre-pandemic times, I've given this show in the sanctuary, and it really does change the experience. So you could look at and point to a window and then blow up the image. And so you have that more direct relationship. So maybe at some future point, we'll actually do it in the synagogue itself. Hopefully. Does that answer your question?
Where's Phyllis? don't see nodding.
Okay.
Let's see. So the next question is from Carol Barkley. And the question is, what holds the glass pieces in place? Do the restored windows use the same material used by the original artisans?
Good question. They are held in at least two different or three different materials. It's lead, and the edges are held in place by a U-channel piece of lead. Where there's only one piece of glass. The center pieces, where there's two pieces of glass divided by lead, those are an H pattern. And then there is a substructural frame of a simple bar of heavier duty metal, steel, that keeps the whole frame in place. Otherwise, it would tend to kind of droop and collapse on itself. So what we were finding, and it's predictable, why the south-facing windows were the worst condition is because of the sun. So you have the exterior rose glass, which I call rose glass, and then there's an interstitial area of a few inches before it gets to the stained glass. When the sun is beating on that glass, it creates a small greenhouse. And so when we reconstructed it, we found out that there was no provision for venting that space. And so one was added as part of the reconstruction. So after literally decades, all of that heat would begin to compromise the integrity of the leading, and the windows would begin to just kind of slide down and bow out. I've got some other images I didn't want to share. I didn't see a need to share, but it shows that there's a bow in some places of over an inch. And so the concern was that if there was any kind of a minor earthquake or anything that could compromise the structure, that window would collapse, virtually collapse on itself. So we didn't want to restrict seating near that window, so we went ahead and drew down on some funds that were made available to us by the Schnitzer family to restore the window. And that served as a catalyst for the Tonkin family to take on a window. So we have several more windows to go.
Okay, more questions.
Sure.
Henry, was everything, all the originals produced in Portland? Like
Yes.
the glass, the colors, the painting, and the leaded pieces, all Portland produced?
My understanding is that that's correct. By the early 50s, Gerlach had left the firm that was the Povey brothers. The Povey brothers were bought by the Fuller Studio, which manufactured and created, stained glass, did a lot of the churches in town. And then Gerlach worked for the Poveys, the Fullers, and then in the early 50s, he created his own studio and had enough work on his own, and did it all in his, from my understanding, his shop. Now, having said that, and it's a great question, I did a glass project several years ago, about 15 years ago, where we got the pigment from here in town from Bullseye, but then it was shipped to a glass factory in southern Germany to fabricate, and then it was all shipped out back to us here. One of the things that has occurred in the past, but I think it's revolving out of that, is the early on when Brookman came to town, there weren't a lot of craftspeople in town. There were some, of course, in plaster and woodwork, but not more of the fine arts in metals and lighting. Brookman was referred to work on the Lloyd estate by a craftsman that I cover in the part 1, where Brookman worked, because of his work with Harry T. Lindbergh, he came across some of the best artisans in the New York area. And when he came out to Portland and found there weren't a lot, he actually worked with those artisans from back east, and slowly apprentices were brought on board, and that skill set was brought to town. More recently, in the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, there's a group in Portland called the Preservation Artisan Guild. And they are a pool of independent artisans that also work collaborative on some of these architectural decorative issues, ideas, because without the artisan, a lot of our historic properties wouldn't be able to be restored. There just isn't the skill set here to work on them. So that is a culture that is coming back.
Wow. Okay, I've got to get back to the chat. Okay. Gosh, Henry, this has been so informative. And I echo the next chat comment from Helen, who said, "This was great, Henry. We'll get out the book and read ahead and look forward to when you can take us in person to see on site." Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
So let's see. Another one. This was incredible, Henry. Thank you so much. Very informative, from Rosie.
Thank you, Rosie.
It was amazing. Thank you so much. I was just glued to all that information and those beautiful slides. They were just fascinating. There was so much to see in them.
Just parenthetically, some of the images are hard to capture. I actually brought a 20-foot ladder in with a tripod so I could frame the images and waiting for the right light. But mercifully, now we have a senior rabbi who has a drone with a camera.
Wow.
So, Rabbi Kahana has agreed that some of the images I would like to recapture, he agreed to bring the drone into the sanctuary. And it's an incredible tool.
Camera.
Yeah.
Oh, let's see. Great presentation this is from Sylvia. Thank you. From Rosie, having done stained glass, I really appreciate the detail of the lead work. Very detailed and lots of hard work.
Yes.
Amazing. It was just fascinating. It was great to see it up close like that. So you actually took the photos.
Yes. Anytime scaffolding is set up anywhere on a project I'm working on, I'm on that scaffolding as quick as I can. And so they allowed me up there to poke around and ask questions, and then allowed me to come to their studio to take a look at the work in progress. I hadn't originally thought that they were going to disassemble every single window, but they did. They disassembled everything, cataloged it, and documented it, and then reconstructed it. So hopefully with some additional bracing added, that this at least the center and the panel 3 will be good for I don't know, another 100 years.
Wow. Oh, here's another thank you. I think I didn't read. Thanks very much, from Phyllis and Warren.
Thank you, Phyllis and Warren.
So informative.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you,
sorry.
Henry.
Just
Awesome.
just a announcement for next month. On November 16th, it's a Tuesday, the third Tuesday, Ralph London will be our guest presenter. Ralph has a world-class collection of cameras and camera memorabilia. And for those of us who have seen it, it is just amazing. So he will be presenting on that, and he will also be showcasing his late wife, Bobby London's, also world-class collection of Stanhopes, and telling them about the story of their lifelong collecting journey, which they did as a couple. So it's going to be a wonderful, another wonderful opportunity to share with a congregant about a passion that belonged to him and his wife.
Okay. And I have some more comments that have just come in. And there was a question, will the recording be available? So I'm sure a lot of people here were wondering that too. And so thanks to Chelsea, she answered that yes, the recording will be available. So that would be good to see that again. And let's see, another thank you from Howard Feldman. Lovely and very informative presentation. Thanks, Henry, and to everyone who put this presentation together.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yes. From the team. Yes.
Thanks, Henry. Look forward to being in person sometime soon. We can be in the sanctuary together. Thanks for all your work on this.
Thank you. That's
Thank
wonderful.
you, Rabbi.
And keep it November 26th on your calendar for the next Teaching Tuesday.
November 16.
Oh, it says 26 on this chat.
Just a little typo.
Oh, there it is. It's corrected. Okay, yeah, 16. Thank you for the correction that came through. Let's see. I think that's all. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Henry. That was phenomenal.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. Take care, all.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm
Thank
gonna end the Zoom now.
Thank you so much. This was great. Bye.